25th Hour Radio Show.
You're tuned into the 25th Hour Radio Show. I'm your host, Rob Fairless. On behalf of my co-hosts, Randy Ashby and Robert Reams, we would like to welcome you to today's program. Today on the show, we have back legendary martial artist Frank Dukes. Frank, how you doing?
Hey, great to be back, guys.
Yeah. Let's see here. We're going to consider this interview part 2 and dig a little deeper into what we were talking about the first time you joined us. And to let everybody know, who hasn't listened to that first interview, you can go to our YouTube channel at 25th Hour Radio Show and check that out. Now, Frank, last time you were here, we discussed the topics of corruption, racism, and just an overall, the overall controversy dealing directly with the martial arts community and yourself. I'd like to continue on with some of those topics that didn't get addressed in our last episode.
Sure.
Let's talk a little bit about a person named Clyde Gentry, who mentions you in a book of his, or an article, something of that nature. And I think it's a perfect example. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Frank.
No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's all right. Okay. I was just saying, I think it's a perfect example of what we were talking about in the last interview, as far as misinformation by media. Can you tell us your side of the story involving, this Clyde Gentry character?
Well, Clyde Gentry, I think, ran a blog is what he did, and he was just, like I was telling you before, martial arts largely an unregulated business, and it's very corrupt in a lot of ways. You have certain circles of the what I call like the elitists, and they're basically a group that's pushed by the magazines, and they aren't really interested in truth. They're really interested in marketing and moving product. These magazines hold themselves out to be, leading objective trade journals, when in reality they're nothing more than catalogs with articles, and they're very deceptive in how they report, what they report on. Like I was talking about last time, they reported this one that ninjutsu was a martial art. It's not. It's an entire field of study like karate or kung fu. You have many different systems within it. But by doing that, and then by promoting only their guy as authentic, they literally created a monopoly and were able to squeeze out and eliminate any competition. That included, in this one person, their star, they included people within his own organization because he was claiming he was the first and only American ninja, when in reality there was, I can think of 5 names before him that were there, like I pointed out in the last thing. With the UFC coming to bear, I have a pretty incredible, I think, fight record, and I set the bar for a lot of people to meet. And that created a lot of resentment and also created a barrier for an organization like the UFC when it was first getting started, because they wanted to make a name for themselves. They needed to develop fighters in their own right with their own legends, and they didn't want to stand in the shadow of me. And one of the things that they wanted to do, and where the UFC first got its name, the Ultimate Fight Championship, really came from a title that was given to me by Vic Moore. He used to call me the Ultimate Fight Champion because I was the only guy who Vic Moore had fought and never beat. He fought Chuck Norris, Bill Wallace, Mike Stone, Bruce Lee in A Test of Speed, just to name some of the greats that he fought. And that's not to take anything away from him. It's just that, I was one guy that Vic Moore could not defeat. And so he gave me that kind of a title. The movie company, when they did Bloodsport, looked at that, they seized upon it, and then they started marketing the movie, Bloodsport, the Ultimate Fight Contest, the Ultimate Warrior, the Ultimate Challenge, all sorts of different ultimate combinations there, and Ultimate Fighting Champion was being one of them. And that was observed, according to Higa Machado, who's a friend of mine, by the Gracie family, who founded the Ultimate Fight Championship. And it was originally started out as the Ultimate Fight Challenge. And they sent in a guy, according to my sources, who's a former employee of mine by the name of Zane Frazier. And if you read, the stuff that's written, the guy offers like 3 different versions of the same story. But the one that stuck is with this guy named Clyde Gentry III, and in his book called No Holds Barred. And then I noticed it just wafted over to another gentleman's book, Big Jim McCann, I think is his name. He's a referee at the OC, and it's a repeat of the same BS. And and what they purport is that in one version, for example, they say that the fight took place in New Orleans. Okay, that when that panned out that I was never in New Orleans, and the story again changed. That back to the original incident that it took place in the ballroom of the Century Plaza Hotel. Now, when Zane Frazier first tells the story, he says it happened outside the hotel. And the reason for that is because what he did is he sucker punched me when I was really inside the hotel. And what he did is he basically snuck up behind me when I was bent over the midst of setting up a display booth. He watched and waited until I was signing an autograph for a child. And since there was children around, I never struck him back for that reason. Instead, I parried his blows, and I used a move called Seanagi, which I took him to the ground where I restrained him. And I want to say something. Prior to this happening, Zane Frazier came over, and he did a whole thing like you'd see on the worldwide, wrestling, WWE wrestling. I mean, you'd think he was Hulk Hogan or something, or one of these guys, Monty Python, just doing the whole Mau thing, saying how I was trying to kill him and all this kind of crazy allegations. And he was basically trying to taunt me to want to fight him. And when that didn't work, then he challenged me. And, of course, he was hoping I would fight him in the first UFC fight. They're trying to get me in the Ultimate Fight Challenge, which became the Ultimate Fight Championship, because they wanted to justify that name. I had that name. And they didn't, of course, want to pay me to be in the fight. The way it was set up is, $100,000, I think, winner take all at the end of it. And, of course, the fight was being sponsored by the Gracie family, which are great practitioners of martial arts. They take nothing away from them. But there was no arm's distance between them running the event and them competing in the event. So right off the bat, I would never, ever fight in an event like that because it just makes sense. If you're going to fight, you want to fight on neutral ground. You don't want to fight on where somebody else can control the outcome by decision or any number of things. And so they couldn't get me in the ring. So they thought maybe the way they could get me in the ring was have Frazier, create this kind of feud between me and him. And Frazier even admits on a radio show called Bob Carson that he was actually selected for the show a year earlier than that. Okay? And then he tells a story that, that basically, because he got in this fight with me, that's how he got selected. No, that's not how he got selected. If you even listen to Frazier in the way he tells his own story prior to this. So he basically, I told the guy, I said, look, Zane, if you really feel that way, we can take it right over there. There's a challenge ring right there. We can take care of it now. I'm not going to wait for this event. We'll just take care of it right here and now. He didn't want to deal with that. So the guy leaves. I put security on notice immediately. I said, there's a publicity stunt going on here, and I need you guys to lock this guy. If you're not going to lock him out of here, I'm out of here. One of the two. I'm holding you guys liable from this point on. And they were put on notice. Well, they were kind of in on it, so they let the guy kind of sneak back into the event. And the guy, like I said, with brass knuckles, while I'm setting up this display booth, I hear my name called out. I just slightly turn, and then, bam, I got hit, clocked, cold by this guy. And, he was an ex-employee of mine. He was a guy who I dismissed after he tried to get me to go along with him with a bogus workman's comp case. I mean, if you can imagine this, there's just no way I was going to go along with it because here he is on one hand applying for workman's comp, claiming that my secretary hurt his eye by closing a door on his eye. Okay, the guy stands 6'6", right? So it isn't like the doorknob hit him in the eye unless he was doing something really, really illicit. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And second of all, which didn't happen, he actually chased her into the room in a rage. For whatever reason, I wasn't there when it happened. I just heard reports of what happened, and I laid him off for like 2 weeks. I said, look, you got to take some time off. I can't have you behave like that in front of students. We're teaching discipline and respect, and you're threatening a woman in front of her child. I said, what's wrong with you? And so he couldn't handle the 2 weeks. The next thing you know, he's put in this workman's comp case. The next thing you know, he's teaching in at the YWCA. There's tape of it. I've got tapes of him, teaching there and what have you. And then the guy just basically tries to raid my business. And that was the extent of my relationship with him prior. It was not exactly what I call a good one. And he probably saw the writing on the wall, because I ran a thing called Frank Diggs' Samurai Connection at that time, and I had a whole battery of instructors there working there from a whole bunch of different systems of martial art. And that's another thing that was like misportrayed. Like I couldn't teach martial arts. He had to teach it for me. No, it wasn't that. We were teaching Kempo karate. He's a Kempo karate teacher. I gave him the opportunity to teach Kempo. I had a judo instructor there. I had a Kuksu One instructor in there, and of course I taught my own system. So I came with an approach that I wanted a multi-approach system for people and offer more than one art in one place at that time, when we were way ahead of ourselves at that point. It was a very successful business at that point. But the fact is, the guy hit me from behind. Next thing you know, Black Belt Magazine had its own agenda. It's again, like I said, it spins the story that it took place in New Orleans. Then it spins the story that we had this fight, and that's how Frazier got picked. It's picked up by, of course, it's picked up, of course, by this guy Clyde Gentry III in his blog, and then it ends up in a book, and then of course it crosses over. And the reality is that it had no business being there, because even this guy in his book cites the fact that there was a lawsuit. But what he doesn't do is that if you looked at the evidence of the lawsuit, the actual substantiated evidence, it shows that, one, there was no mutual combat that took place between us with his sole arrest. There was a $250,000 adjudicated judgment entered into against him in court proceedings, over $500,000 in settlement proceedings awarded to me because it was such a cowardly attack. Okay? And it's all a matter of public record. This is, and the proceedings determined that there's no fight that took place. And the reason no fight took place is because I had the composure at that moment when he hit me, having been a fighter. I said, if I throw one punch on this guy for the rest of his life, he's going to be able to tell people, oh, I fought Frank Dukes. And I didn't throw one punch. All I did is use, like I said, a Seoi-nage, threw him through like Steven Speakman's booth, and I aimed there directly because I knew the guy could have warned me when it was coming up. Tore right into the booth, took him to the ground. I held him there in a submission position where police could come up from behind him, cuff him, and take him away. And that's when his buddies go to town on me. And I'm not going to mention their names, but they're well-known UFC fighters today. And they went to town on me. So here I am by myself holding out 5 of the so-called best fighters in the UFC, which to me said something about what was really going on in that sport in the early days of. Today it's a whole different animal. I don't want you people to confuse what's going on today and what Dana White did with the organization compared to when it was first starting out. And it was just it was what we call a mishigas, just a crazy little environment where you couldn't tell who's a real martial artist, who's a brawler, who's what. Today the guys who go in that ring, they got real skills. They really work at it. It's really developed itself. I got a lot of respect for the guys in the sport today. But when it first started out, it started out, because of that, because of blood sport, but it lost the martial art aspect of it, and I don't think that was the fault of the Gracie family, because I think they were doing everything in their power to try to keep it contained. But as you grow, sometimes it brought in certain people, and it just, it got too large. Kumites I fought in were very, very small, invitation-only kind of thing, and people really did their fact-checking on you. And, by the way, when things didn't work out with me as planned, I recall being informed by someone that Frazier attacked another martial art Kumite champion by the name of Byung Yu, and he attacked him from behind 3 weeks later in the same calculated manner. And this resulted in Frazier being banned from Ed Parker's Long Beach Internationals for 3 years. So, and then after that, I saw the guy, and not to bash on the guy, but, I see the guy on Jerry Springer where he's a pimp, or professing to be a pimp, and defending why it's okay to be women and defenseless, basically defenseless people. And this is supposed to be a martial arts instructor, right?
Yeah.
So, and it really sickened me because I had employed this guy at one time. So you can imagine just how upset I was to see just even that. Even if it was an act. You understand what I'm saying? Even if it was an act, it affected a lot of people. And with all this stuff going on, with all this craziness going on, you don't see anybody reversing the truth. Nobody's going back to the fact that there are court proceedings, there's a medical report, there's police records, everything that disputes this, and you don't see the story getting squashed. You don't see the story being retold in the media. You certainly don't see Black Belt Magazine correcting the falsehoods that they put out there. Okay, and that's not to just bash on Black Belt, because there's a lot of things out there, but they're dependent upon selling books, moving product, moving certain stars in their agenda, and they circle the wagons to protect them. And unfortunately, we're seeing in the media today a lot of laziness and sensationalism that prevails over real, Edgar R. Murrow journalism that used to go on.
Well, I'm glad you set the record straight on that. I mean, when you're on top, everybody wants to bring you down. You know what I mean? And I guess that's what they were thinking when they were dealing with you, Frank.
Well, the thing is, they can take their pot shots, they can do whatever they want, but the reality is, I'll give you another example. I had another guy, Soldier of Fortune magazine did the same thing to me. People don't realize that they had a financial interest in a thing called Paladin Press to put out, again, the books of my business competitors. So, of course, they did a trash and bash job on me, and they attributed to me things I didn't say. And that's what I really want people to be aware of. You really got to do your own fact checking. You really got to go to the horse's mouth. For me, if you can imagine, it took me over 22 years, 25 years before I even was allowed to actually be given a forum to actually tell my side of the story. People are passing judgment on me without ever hearing a word from me. Fortunately for me, I was operating in a venue where that crap doesn't fly. And a good example of that is, when I was working with U.S. Navy SEALs and training them, and my name ended up on, in the as a source listed as a source contributor to the U.S. Navy SEAL Manual. In fact, I've been an adjunct faculty member for the Criminal Justice Institute in St. Petersburg, Florida, where I've lectured for, and for Joint Task Force operations, multi-jurisdictional operations, and if you're for it, man, it'll show up right there with those guys. There's no hiding who you are or what you are from trained government investigators and agents and operators who are in the field doing this every day, and they could smell it out, a mile away. But a 14-year-old kid, who wants to assert his identity, who's looking for someone to look up to, well, that's a different story. And unfortunately, we're making heroes, I think, out of the wrong people. You got guys who, like I said, who are being held up to be heroes who are really nothing more than paper tigers, or guys who have really, they're only there because of it's been basically they've created a false environment and a false, set of accolades for people to look up to that isn't there.
Okay. Hey, Frank, I think your partner Gordon is on the line. Gordon, are you there?
I am here.
Okay. I buzzed you in, and I figured you knew what was going on, so I didn't say anything. I didn't want to interrupt Frank and what he was talking about.
I'm glad Gordon's there, because I want Gordon to really say, this is the one thing. I'm not trying to whine, and I'm not trying to make this pity, I'm a victim. I don't look at that at anything. I just want people to understand what has happened in the industry because of power going unchecked, power going where it's not regulated, when there's a lack of objectivity. I mean, I'm one of those firm believers that says, you know what, we need to put the fairness doctrine back into the law in media so both sides are heard equally. I'm a person who looks at this situation and says, what can I do to grow from it? And out of it, I wouldn't have met Gordon as a result of that. I mean, I'll let Gordon tell you about how we met and how this has actually, I believe, led into a very, very positive foundation for really maybe even changing the world as we know it in the future. And I'll let you talk, Gordon.
Okay. A couple of things I just want to add, and that is it's not just the martial arts industry, but the sad part is, of course, that at the foundation of martial arts is supposed to be this altruistic higher purpose, and it belongs there. To be a true martial artist means something more than just being able to punch and kick well. So that's the sad part of it, but we're trying to, of course, return to those times when that meant something. But, a struggle for power and personal gain is really at the core of all the problems, and that's one of the reasons why, of course, I compiled, including Frank Duke's contribution, the 5 Principles of Everything book, but we can talk about that in a second. When I was, this is in the early 80s, I was writing for, I'm a freelance writer, so I was writing for everybody. But I was one of the few people that Rainbow Publications would call up and say, we have an assignment for you, rather than the other way around. Of course, I've been a martial artist now for almost 50 years myself, and at the time I was a black belt, but I never wrote about myself. I never, ever wrote about myself for anything. I always found somebody else who knew about a subject that I wanted to write about. So I had become interested in a massage technique called Shuaka, and I wanted to write about it, so I talked to the editor of Black Belt magazine, and I said, I want to write, this article about Shuaka, and they said, fine. So I got on the telephone, and I started calling around different dojos and places that may know something about Shuaka, and nobody knew anything about it until I got to Frank Duke's. So I told him what I was planning. He said, come on over, I'll help you out. I went there. We took some photographs. He did a demonstration. Just so happened that he had been on television already, and that's incredible, performing Shuaka, and the result of Shuaka was a guy who had gotten up out of his wheelchair for the first time in his life and walked because of Frank Duke's efforts. And so I wrote the article, took it back to Black Belt magazine, and they took one look at it and said, "Oh, well, we can't publish this." And I had never heard of such a thing before. And I was a freelance writer just trying to make money for my family. And they said it has Frank Duke's name in it. And they told me, and I don't know if this is true or not, or if this was just the story at the time or anything else because I've never seen it, but they said that they had a contract with another person calling themselves Ninja, Stephen Hayes, and that they were not allowed to publish anything contrary to his version of ninjutsu in the magazine. And so Frank Dukes was basically blackballed from the magazine. His name couldn't be used at all. So, of course, my first thought was, am I going to still get paid for this? But
yeah,
I went back and I told Frank Dukes, who I had just met, the whole story, and actually that story has become the foundation for the novel Shidoshi, The Four Ways of the Corpse, my first novel that came out a couple of years ago. But at the time, of course, Frank told me the story about basically trade libel and how people were trying to keep him down, and was giving me a demonstration of
some of the things that were going on around him by telling me his problems with current instructors that he had there, etc. And I knew from my own experience now that what he was telling me was true, because they had told me that they couldn't not do this for the exact reasons that he was stating, essentially. So at that moment, I just said, well, I'll help you. People later on, people were saying that Frank Dux was charging too much and he wasn't really giving good instruction, et cetera, et cetera. But I have to tell you that I have never, ever paid Frank Dux anything, any lesson whatsoever. In fact, he's always compensated me. After a short time, I became one of his instructors, in fact, because I was just trying to help him out. I knew basically what was going on, and I just followed the program. I was a black belt in Goju-Ryu and had studied Ishin-Ryu and Kung Fu and a lot of other things. But anyways, I was just trying to help at the time, and basically it became obvious in a short time that he knew exactly what he was talking about. He was way better than I was. I knew that much. I wasn't involved in any of the stories or any of the history or any of the conflict, quite honestly. But, of course, as years went on and I became more and more a friend of Frank Dux and more supporter of him, I saw that there were people who were actually just trying to make sure that I didn't succeed or any of my family, and it became kind of a dangerous situation for a long time. But that's how we met, and we've remained, in contact until, especially recently, when I sent the manuscript over to him and said, I'm thinking about publishing this novel. What do you think? And then we actually got involved in some other projects, and today we're 2 days away from the premiere issue of Legends and Legacies magazine, L&L magazine.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. I don't mean to interrupt you, but we only have like a minute and 50 seconds left in the show. It's only a 30-minute broadcast, so I wanted to kind of make sure that you guys got to plug that before we got off here. We got a minute and 45 seconds. Tell us a little bit about Legends and Legacies before we have to leave.
Go ahead, Frank.
Well, Legends and Legacies really was born out of the idea that people were being denied an opportunity to really protect their legend and legacy and have access to the gateways to the masses. And so it started off really as an article that believe it or not, Gordon actually went back to Black Belt magazine, offered it to him years later after a change in ownership, and they denied it, and then turned around, and we started then doing it together on worldwidedojo.com, and from that it has now morphed into a broader spectrum, hitting any number of people, and it's got an educational component to it, and it's just drawing to it all sorts of different things, because once people are armed with the truth, like the saying goes, when you know the truth, it sets you free.
Yep. Guys, we're almost out of time. Frank, thank you so much for coming back on the program. Also, Gordon Rakusa, thank you very much for joining us. It was our pleasure for having you on the show, too.
Pleasure.
Hopefully, like I said, our show is really short, so we can only put so much information out there in the given time that we have. So,
have everybody to Legends and Legacies, legends-legacies.com.
Legends-legacies.com.
Legends-legacies.com, correct.
Okay, we got it out there. And Frank, thank you again for being on our program.
Oh, yeah. And I just want to say, I find it pretty fascinating. We have people like Oliver Stone on there and other notable greats in that magazine. So please check it out. I think you'll be impressed.
All right.
All right.
Have a good one. Thanks a lot,
Right.
Frank. Thanks, Gordon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
25th Hour Radio Show.